History isn't always about grand battles or famous rulers. Sometimes it's about a single, life-altering decision made by an ordinary person. Today, we're going to explore one of those moments, a family's journey across an entire ocean, fueled by nothing more than a whispered rumor and the hope for something better. At its heart, what this story really boils down to is a gamble, a huge, all-or-nothing bet for a family that had very little to lose but an entire world to gain. They were answering a call, a promise of a golden shore, but to get there, they had to sail straight into the unknown. And that's exactly where we're going to start. The year is 1867. We're going to follow one family as they make a choice that will cut them off from everything they've ever known, all based on whispers of a place they called L'America. All right, so first we've got to understand the choice itself. What could possibly compel someone to pack up their entire life and cross the Atlantic on a tiny sailing ship? Well, the answer lies in these two really powerful forces, push and pull. So you've got two completely different worlds here. On one side, you've got Sicily. After Italy was unified, the old way of life basically collapsed, leaving farmers stuck with crushing poverty and not much hope for the future. But on the other side, you have post-Civil War Louisiana. Plantation owners were desperate for labor, and recruiters were spreading the word all over Sicily, promising work, promising opportunity. And this is the family that heard that call. Angelo Battaglia, just 26 years old, his wife Fortunata, only 23, and their son Guiseppe, who was barely a toddler. For them, the stagnation in Sicily wasn't some abstract idea. It was their everyday reality. The promise of Louisiana, well, it was a risk, for sure, but a risk worth taking for a shot at a better life for their son. Okay, so making the decision, that's one thing, but actually acting on it, that's a whole other story. Now we get to the moment of departure, the real point of no return. Their journey didn't start at the water's edge. Nope, it began way up in the mountains of Sicily, in their little village of Alia. Can you just imagine that trip? Leaving the only home you've ever known, making your way down to the coast, knowing that every single step is taking you further from the familiar and closer to a future you can only guess at.
And then they arrive here, the port of Palermo. This picture just captures the sheer scale of what was going on. This wasn't just one family's journey, it was a massive movement of people. The port was this chaotic symphony of sounds and smells, crowds, cargo, people shouting, people crying. For a family from a small mountain village, it must have been absolutely overwhelming.
This was their ride, the Caterina. Now, when you and I think of transatlantic ships, we probably picture these huge steamers, right? Well, that's not what this was. This was a brig, a workhorse of the sea, built for cargo, not for people. For the Battaglias, this little ship was everything. It was their bridge to a new world, but it was also a complete break from their old one.
And get this, the size. The Caterina was only about 90 feet long. To put that in perspective, that's shorter than 3 city buses parked end to end. This tiny wooden ship was going to be their home, their hospital, their entire world as they crossed the Atlantic Ocean.
And on that tiny little ship, 103 passengers. Let that sink in. This wasn't a passenger vessel. It was a merchant ship, and its cargo hold was quickly converted to cram in as many people as physically possible. The Battaglias weren't passengers. They were basically human cargo. Okay, so now we get to the heart of the story, the voyage itself. And this was no cruise. This was an ordeal, something that would test the absolute limits of their physical and mental endurance. 60 days. 2 months. That's how long the crossing would take, powered only by the wind. Just think about that. 60 days of total uncertainty, of being tossed around by the waves, with no land in sight. And this is where they lived, steerage, a dark, stinky, poorly ventilated cargo hold. They had wooden bunks, or maybe just some mats on the floor. With over 100 people packed in there was no privacy, no fresh air. And during storms, they'd be locked down in this space for days at a time. The food was just as basic. The ship's provisions were all about survival, not comfort. Day in and day out, it was ship's biscuit, which is basically a rock-hard cracker we'd call hardtack, and some salted meat or fish. It was just enough to keep them alive. That's it. On top of the awful conditions, there was the relentless motion of the sea. Seasickness was just a constant companion for everyone. And then there was the ever-present fear of a storm, which could turn their cramped quarters into a terrifying, pitching prison in the dark. But,
Even in all this misery, something pretty remarkable happened. A community was forged right there in the dark. They were all bound by their shared Sicilian dialect, by prayers they'd say together, and by songs that reminded them of the homes they'd left behind. They were all in it together, a tiny floating piece of Sicily caught somewhere between the homeland they'd given up and the future they were sailing toward. So after 2 long months, the ordeal is finally over. And this brings us to the final chapter of their journey, their arrival in the New World, and the moment their story goes from family lore into cold, hard historical fact.
April 1st, 1867. The Caterina sails up the Mississippi and docks in New Orleans. Imagine the shock to their senses, the humid air, the new sounds, a language they couldn't understand. The Battaglias have made it. It's an incredible story of survival. But how can we be so sure of all these details? How do we know this isn't just a legend that's been passed down?
Because history leaves a paper trail, and this is the proof. Angelo Battaglia's immigration card, filled out right there at the Custom House in New Orleans. Look at the details. Name, Battaglia Angelo. Age 26. Occupation, laborer. Last embarked at Palermo. And the ship? The Brig Caterina, April 1, 1867. It's all right there. It is real.
And here, folks, is the exclamation point. The ship's actual passenger list. And if you look closely, right there on lines 17, 18, and 19, there they are. Arcangelo, age 26. Fortunata, age 23. And Guiseppe, age 3. Their names, handwritten in ink more than 150 years ago, transforming them from characters in a story into real, living, breathing people. This is the moment their journey becomes history. So this one family's epic journey, a story of desperation, endurance, and incredible hope, was saved by just a few lines of ink on a piece of paper. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many millions of stories just like this one are out there, sitting in an archive somewhere, just waiting to be found?